Good morning, church family and other friends who are joining us today. I want to welcome you to this series of short devotionals that I'm doing this week that I have entitled 8 Days That Changed the World. Every day this week, we're going to track and trace the footsteps of Jesus as he made his way through the last week of his earthly life and ministry. Yesterday, we talked about in the message about Palm Sunday, Jesus' entry into Jerusalem on that day. Next Sunday will be Easter Sunday, of course, but this 8-day period was a very important period, not only in Jesus' life and ministry, but it's a very important time for us as Christians and for our Christian faith. Some very important things happened each step of the way, and that's what we're going to look at during the course of this week. So each morning at about this time of the morning, you can see this short devotional, 5 to 8 minutes, and learn a little bit about what happened on that particular day of the week. Again, I'm calling this 8 Days That Changed the World. So I want to read the biblical account in just a few minutes of what happened on this first day. This is Monday after Palm Sunday. It's that first day after that day, and right after Jesus' entry. And so here's what happened. After Jesus spent some time in Jerusalem on Sunday after his entry, he and the disciples went back to this small village outside of Jerusalem called Bethany. And there he stayed at the home of some friends of his, Mary and Martha. You probably recognize those names. They were sisters, and they were sisters to a man named Lazarus, who Jesus had raised from the dead not long before this. And they were his good friends. He often spent time at their house. It was a place of rest and comfort to him, and he enjoyed being with them as their friends. And so after the events of Sunday, they went back outside the city of Jerusalem and spent the night in Bethany. And then so now this is Monday morning, and I want to read from Mark chapter 11 what happened on this day, the Monday of this week. So Mark chapter 11, beginning in verse 11, it says, Jesus entered Jerusalem and came into the temple, and after looking around at everything, he left for Bethany with the 12, since it was already late. On the next day, when they had left Bethany, he became hungry. Seeing at a distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see if perhaps he would find anything on it. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. He said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples were listening. Then they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who were buying and selling in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who were selling doves. And he would not permit anyone to carry merchandise through the temple. And he began to teach and say to them, Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a robber's den?'" The chief priests and scribes heard this and began seeking how to destroy him, for they were afraid of him, for the whole crowd was astonished at his teaching. Now, there are two main events that happened on this Monday. I call this day the day of cursing and cleansing. And so let's look at this idea of cursing. What's going on with that? Jesus and his disciples were passing by on the way back into Jerusalem that Monday morning, and he sees a fig tree from a distance, and he goes over a little bit closer to it looking for some figs. And when he gets closer enough to it, he determines that there are leaves on the tree but no figs. And he curses it. It's a very unusual thing that we see Jesus do. What's going on with that? Well, it was a parable for the eyes, you might say. It was a visual lesson for his disciples and for all the nation of Israel. He cursed the tree that had leaves but no fruit. Think about that. Leaves but no fruit. So in other words, it had the appearance of life and vitality and healthiness. It had the appearance that everything was good and that it looked the way it should look. But when he looked closer, it had failed to do the one thing that it was put on earth to do, and that was to bear fruit. Even though the appearances outwardly were good, the fatal flaw in this tree was that it just wasn't bearing any fruit. Now, what's the application of that? What's the lesson? What was he trying to get across to us. There are two primary applications, so stay with me on this. The primary application, first and foremost, was to the nation of Israel, to the people of Israel, to his own people. And what he was saying to them was, you're God's people, and for all of your religious leaders and for all of your religious activity, there's a lot going on, but there's no fruit there. There's a lot of activity and there's a lot of ritual and there's a lot of busyness. But if you look beneath the surface, beneath the appearances, there's no real spiritual fruit there. You've got activity, but no fruitfulness. So this was an indictment, an accusation, a warning of judgment, really, against the nation of Israel, and especially to the leaders of Israel. It was a warning that it was not all just about appearances, that God desires fruitfulness from his people. Now, is there another application that might be good for us? Is there something that would apply to our life? The answer very clearly is yes, because listen to this. God still desires fruitfulness in his people. God still wants his people to be fruitful. And so I say to you this morning that it's not about our outward appearances. It's not about our religious activities. It is not about the busyness of what we do as the church and as the body. What God is really interested in is this. Is there any spiritual fruit in your life? Is there any fruit spiritually in your life? God looks beneath the surface in my life and your life. He looks beneath the activity and the appearances and all the outward stuff, and he looks for fruit. In John chapter 8, Jesus said that it is in the bearing of fruit that we prove ourselves to be his followers, his disciples, that we belong to him. It is in our fruit bearing that we demonstrate whether we belong to God or not. And so the reverse is true. It is our lack of fruit bearing that demonstrates that we don't belong to God. Now that's a very serious message, isn't it? God wants us to be fruitful. And if I'm not fruitful, then do I really have a right to call myself a child of God? Because if I am connected to him, like the branch is connected to the vine, then there will naturally be fruit. And so it's a warning, not only for the people, the nation of Israel, it's a warning for us. God still desires fruitfulness in my life and your life. What about this other event that happened on this Monday? It was the cleansing of the temple. Remember, this is the Passover season. And all of these people, all these Jewish people from outside the city had to come to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. And as they came, they were expected to bring a sacrifice, to give a sacrifice as part of their worship. And if they were traveling from a great distance away, they did not want to bring that animal sacrifice with them. And so as a convenience, as a service, the temple priests, the temple officials allowed those Jewish worshipers to buy what they needed in the temple court, the court of the Gentiles. And if they had money from their city and their region, they would have to exchange that for temple currency. And so they had those tables set up with people selling merchandise and exchanging money, exchanging currency for all of those worshipers. But what had began as a service to the people had become sinful by Jesus' day, because those temple officials who were selling this merchandise, these sacrifices, were charging an exorbitant rate of money. And to exchange your money, they were charging an exorbitant exchange rate. And so it become a point of greed, become a point of profit. And Jesus saw that, and he reacted very strongly to that. He shut it down. He drove those vendors out, and he refused to let anyone come through that place. And he said something very important. He says, my house should first and foremost be a house of prayer. It should be a house of prayer. Then he said, instead, you have turned it into a den of thieves. You've turned it into a den of thieves. You've turned it into a place that takes advantage of people instead of helping them. And this house is anything but a house of prayer. Here's my takeaway in this for us today. For all of our activity, for all of our busyness as a church, we must never forget that this place, his house, is to be a house of prayer. It's to be a house of prayer. No matter what else we do as the church, as our church, as this church, we must always keep the focus on this being a house of prayer. So don't get so caught up in working for the Lord that you don't spend time with the Lord in prayer. It's very, very important. And so I want to close on this. I wonder if Jesus visited us as a church and saw all of our activity and saw our worship services, would he consider this to be a house of prayer? Could he tell that prayer is a priority for us? And then I want to take it a step further and ask, if Jesus were to visit your house, your home, would he consider that to be a place of prayer, a house of prayer? Is your life a life of prayer? Do you spend time in prayer? And so Monday, it was a day of cursing and a day of cleansing. And it was a day of important lessons and important truth from Jesus. It was a day that we need to pay attention to. And so I hope you've learned a little bit from that on Monday of the 8 days that changed the world. And so I hope that you tune in tomorrow, and we'll see what happened on Tuesday of this very, very important week. Thank you for joining us today. Have a good day.